BAM is a communications agency that believes stories move the world. We move stories forward for technology-driven brands that challenge, change, and create entire industries. Today, we're talking to Rob Haralson, who leads communications and government relations for Anzu Partners. He previously worked as executive director at trustandads.org, where he was responsible for developing and achieving the organization's overall mission and objectives. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dear BAM podcast. Today, as mentioned, we have the wonderful Rob on the show. Hi, Rob.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. This is exciting.
Oh, thank you for being here. You know, trying to solve one problem at a time for this community. So let's dive right in with our first question. This one's a little bit of a short one. Let's do it as a warm-up here. Here we go. Dear BAMF, my client's messaging is inconsistent across owned, earned, and paid channels. What's the best way to align messaging if all three channels are being managed by separate agencies?
Oh my God. Fire two of your agencies? No. Interesting question. And it's probably not that uncommon, particularly for larger companies that just, have external resources that are helping them out. I've actually been in this situation before where running like a larger campaign where you do have multiple agencies providing content and helping kind of push out what we hope is a singular message. It does take an extra level of coordination, particularly internally. I've actually remember having, multiple agencies kind of all getting on calls just to make sure that we were in sync, even without the client. But, from an internal standpoint, I think it obviously is incredibly helpful, and if it's updated even daily if need be, but having kind of that central document of messaging and here are the focuses that we're going to push out on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and just making sure that those are all kind of in tune and make sure everybody has kind of the same information. Otherwise, it is going to be fractured across multiple channels, which is not going to do anyone any good.
No, how frustrating. Did you actually, since you've been here in this situation, what did you just have a shared like Google Doc? Is it a spreadsheet? It's like, what is it?
Google Docs it's the greatest thing in the world because it gives the ability for everybody to kind of come in and make updates. And so that you have a central resource that's not version 2 versus version 3.
Mm-hmm.
So using a shared platform like that, be it Dropbox or Google or I mean, there's, a limitless number of them now to be able to revert to that resource to make sure that everybody's on kind of a key message, I think is really important. But it does take, listen, it's, part of having external help in agencies is that somebody has to manage those. And so it does require, an extra step or two of daily input.
Yeah, we don't know from this writer where they sit. Are they overarchingly seeing things? Are they one of the cogs in here? We don't know, but all on the same page, the literal same page, digital page, Google Doc, great. And then also, I think even more importantly, revision or re-looking, just taking a reglance every quarter, every whatever, how frequently you need to make sure everyone's still aligned in saying anything. Because what you also see is then, oh, wait, but something changed or something. Oh, this is a new direction. We kind of tweaked it here. We did this. But the other thing too, so to take a look at it consistently so that everyone's still on the same page, the page is still the same. But also, if it's inconsistent now, first item of attack is get on that same page and then go, okay, now if we have all agreed to this, we need to update all of everything where the messaging stands because it is inconsistent. If you're working with all comms people, they should be able to see that and be like, oh, okay.
Having been in Washington for as long as I've had, I've done a number of government investigations where, the message will change on a daily basis. You have digital channels, you have surrogates, you have, a number of people kind of pushing out what we hope is a singular message. But if that's changing on a daily basis, again, it really does require, kind of a consistent, making sure that everybody's on the right page.
Mm-hmm. All right. That was our warm up, Rob. So Oh, now we got a diversity one. Dear Banff, a diverse workplace helps foster a more creative and innovative place while providing variety of perspectives. My client has recently begun hiring a more diverse workforce and would like to create a campaign around this, finally addressing the diversity issue. As their counsel, we've recommended to not pursue the story, but they continue to push. After outlining the negative repercussions, the topic continually is asked when can our team can execute. What's your recommendation to handle a client who won't listen to their strategic counsel? Lots of things going on in here, if you ask me.
Yeah, I was going to say this is multi-layered. For first, I would agree to recommend not to pursue that story as a primary PR campaign. I don't think it's advantageous for any company to promote something that they should have been doing all along. It is 2020, but that's not to say that you can't celebrate diversity and you can't, point to it as a secondary message and kind of sprinkling it into larger PR campaigns or interviews, or even put it in your boilerplate that you strive to maintain a diverse workforce. It's not that, I'm not saying you can't celebrate it, but I don't think it can be is a primary PR campaign. Again, it's 2020. It's one of those things that I don't think you can kind of push primarily. But, again, let's find areas where you can insert it. If it's in imagery on your website and in marketing materials, certainly, indirectly celebrate it that way. Find places where you can put it, but let's not make it a primary PR campaign.
It's not a story.
It's not. It shouldn't be.
It's already a dead story too. The only thing I'd say, unless it is something so ridiculous, like I can't even imagine, like you're a construction tech company and you've been 98% white males and now you're suddenly 50% African American women, or something so absolutely different. But that is so unlikely. I agree completely with what you're saying here of, okay, where can you weave it in? And really, is it part of the core values? Is it part of the mission? Is it part of any of that? If it is, great, then somehow you can integrate it there. But if it's then not, maybe it's just on your hiring page or something about your team page.
Yeah. And if it was 5 years ago and you got dinged on this really bad, like a lot of companies have over the course of the last decade, maybe it's a little bit of a different scenario. But ironically, because of the diversity of our existing workforce and our existing, constituency across the entire United States, you're never going to make everyone happy.
Agreed. Next question here. Oh, actually, though, Rob, we didn't really cover, the point about the counsel. What's your recommendation to handle a client who won't listen to their strategic counsel? Because that has nothing to do with the diversity part.
Yeah, that just becomes that just becomes stubborn clients. Listen, I think you have to be kind of firm in your conviction on what you think is the best way and the best path forward. And certainly, in this case, I think finding those kind of ways to intertwine this message into broader PR campaigns, hopefully, is something that will satisfy the client. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it really depends on the client themselves on, how to kind of navigate the stubbornness of them.
And what this question, a lot of context we're missing here. Is there something defensive about the person here? So the agency person, is it you, basically, writer? Is it something about how your tone, your delivery, your expertise is sitting with them? In other words, are you not messaging or talking to them in a way that is convincing? Because part of our jobs as the agency is, if our goal is to get the client to do our recommendations, how you convey that, how you recommend that. It's like telling kids, teaching kids. Every kid's different, so you need to work with what the parameters and the response of the kid is to get the outcome you want. So if you want the kid to go to bed, okay, you got to try different things. So anyway.
No, I was going to say there's also, there's probably case studies and case examples of where you can point to where a company has, I think in good faith or in earnest trying to promote their diversity, but where it's backfired. I'm sure there's got to be examples where you can kind of point in this case to say, look, this is where it's been tried and it's failed. So let's not repeat.
Mm-hmm. Let's not follow those examples.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes using a bit of the stick approach to say and wave the stick of like, hey, this is what could happen. This is what we don't want to be in. This can help you with crisis comms convincing. If you have a reluctant client who's like, we don't need what? We don't need any prep. What's going to happen? And it's like, well, let me give you a couple examples. That can be really compelling because then people can really see, oh, it's to prevent that situation. Okay. So there you go with that. All right. Moving on to the next one here. Dear Banff, many of the events my client was planning to attend speak at have been canceled, of course, because of COVID. Is there a virtual replacement? Do you think there is value in attending speaking at any of these? If there is no virtual event and the event has been canceled, is it worth setting up our own virtual webinar?
My answer is yes, yes, yes. Look, if there's a virtual replacement, should you attend or speak? The alternative is nothing. And everyone is in the same boat. And quite frankly, my guess is that the virtual events that have been replaced by the physical events in the course of the last several months and will continue to be replaced over the course of the several months moving forward are going to be widely attended. Not only that, you're still reaching that kind of core audience that you're trying to reach. In the absence of any kind of type of virtual event, then absolutely set up webinars. I mean, again, companies still have a duty to push out their message, and it's advantageous to help their bottom lines. If there isn't those kind of virtual opportunities, sure, you should be creating those opportunities to make sure that you're reaching your customers or your audience or whoever it is that you're trying to reach.
I'd agree with a caveat, which is there is so much noise right now, as we know. And so don't just do one to do one. And it's going to be the same damn thing. And it's going to just be more noise, especially if you've seen the topic already before or something like that. So my only pushback on this would be, yes, if you're doing something distinct, something that you can really point to, and you'd have to be creative because there's only so many things we could do virtually, then okay, I would consider that. We're going to be doing, for example, I know this podcast will be running a little bit later, but we're doing a big, basically speed dating in a virtual way with with dozens of media and dozens of founders. And of course, we're all not sitting in a giant room together, rotating chairs and stuff. But the point is, like, everyone's rotating around on different Zoom links and all this stuff. I mean, that's distinct and it's one-on-one. So it's not like, oh, another webinar, 200 people attending. It's a little bit more dynamic in that sense, because you're like, ooh, okay, I have all these meetings to go to in this 2-hour block, boom, boom, boom. So that's something. So I just caution or just suggest, hey, think differently. How can you otherwise make this intriguing and distinct amid all this noise happening right now?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you could apply, the idea of doing, creating your own webinar. You could apply the same rules that I like to think about in terms of writing a press release or doing a PR campaign. And I always kind of look at, news in almost kind of three buckets. A, does it, does the news that you want to push, does it demonstrate momentum in the company? B, does it share data points or insights that no one else in the industry has? And then C, does it show something about the value, the culture of the company or the value of the company? And if you can check the box on two of those three, then great. If you can't, then it might not be newsworthy. So maybe you apply that to the idea of, okay, if we're going to create a webinar, is the content worthy of that? Is the message worthy of that, to make sure that there's going to be benefit to the people that you're trying to attract?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So hard with the virtual stuff because it's just not as satisfying. I know, and everyone's in the same boat. Here we are.
It's not, but it's the reality it's the reality that we live in now. So, I think everybody's probably getting a little bit of, Zoom fatigue right now, but it is a thing.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to our next question. Dear Banff, my client has a board meeting coming up to discuss the company's runway for the next 24 months in light of COVID. The client sees the value in PR and expresses it regularly, yet our point of contact gave us a heads up that marketing and PR budgets are up for discussion. Is there anything else I can do right now to make sure they relay the value to the board? Or is it too late if the meeting is just a few days away? What's your suggestion?
Oh, wow. I can imagine this is not, this is not uncommon. And, listen, I think in every economic downturn or economic down cycle for any company, the first thing that is sometimes on the chopping block is marketing and PR. But I would push back on that a little bit, particularly now. We're not going to be in this down cycle for forever. And quite frankly, if you're not using PR to improve your bottom line, then you're not doing it correctly. And so in some cases, you could make the argument that actually you need to put the pedal a little bit further down on PR to provide the sales and marketing team that air cover that they need to really kind of push, whatever the service, if you're selling a service or a product or whatever. And I think again, if we've all done our jobs correctly, we have metrics and data to support, the benefit of PR. Again, it should be a much more evidence-based and data-driven industry where I think you can directly correlate the value of PR to a company's bottom line. So if you're conveying that in a number of slides to the board of directors, then hopefully they can also see the value of it. But again, if you're not using PR to help your bottom line, then you're not doing it right.
Yeah, 100%. I'd say too.
It's the easier said than done. Because someone will say, well, what's the value of a front page Wall Street Journal article? Well, it depends. It depends on the audience. But in some cases, the industry trade cover story is going to be even more valuable than some of the more mainstream publications. And so, but there is ways to quantify that.
There are. And if your team is not using any of those robust tools, analytics, if they are, God forbid, giving you unique monthly views, you need to fire them right now. I'm serious. I'm serious. The thing for this person though writing in is that what we don't know here is your point of contact and how powerful is this point of contact? What's their level? What's going on? I mean, if they're part of the board, okay, that's a much better position. If they're coming in just to report to the board, oof, yeah. So we don't know, but what I'd recommend here is ensure and arm this person and prep them as best as you can. And of course, whatever form of your relationship it is, if that's something that would be welcomed, just to ensure your messenger basically, because you're not going to be there. This team, you're not going to be in that boardroom. So you don't have that opportunity. Your messenger has to be prepared as much as possible, even though they're on the same page and expresses, they say here, they see the value in PR and expresses it regularly. Yeah, but are they prepared to speak to the board and point out, here's the top 4 compelling reasons. So if you even want to be even super proactive, again, with the permission of your point of contact here is, hey, why don't we put together a 2-page memo outlining 3 main points of what is going so well, why this needs to be maintained, et cetera, and what's beyond, because you're talking about the next 24 months and of what's happening here. So be prepared. And even if they don't even get to that stuff, hey, that's okay. At least you came in fully, completely prepared. I would really not want this person. Boards are tough. I don't want this person to be in and just be harangued and just mutilated on just, where's this? Where's that? What's this message? You need to be just so prepared on this for this person, your messenger. You got to send in your messenger well.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. Having and having a champion in the boardroom is going to be critical, like if at all possible. Because my guess is that marketing and PR budgets aren't the only thing that are that are necessarily on the chopping block. I mean, it could be across the board. And
Exactly. You have no idea. So that's the thing. So come in prepared, since you don't know what else is on the chopping block, and you're not going to be able to point fingers at anything else, nor is that your role. Be prepared to completely show your position. Fight for it. This is like battle cry. You need to be ready for battle.
Mm-hmm. Anecdotally, it's kind of interesting. I have a good friend who's the CEO of a publicly traded company whose company has been just decimated by COVID, and they've had to lay off a significant number of their team, both on the executive side and just within their locations around the country. But the one thing that they did keep is a strong PR component to their kind of core team, because they understand that kind of pushing out that message is going to be critical to the success of the company as it pivots into this new reality. And so making sure that they have good investor relations and PR, and I think is going to be incredibly important for their short-term and long-term success and survival, really.
What a time to be in comms and PR. That's all I can say. Okay, we got our last question here. Let's do it. Dear Bamf, I run PR for my company and have felt pressure to put my CEO forward for media ops. Yet he is terrible with interviews. I've had to jump in more than once and interrupt him when what he says on an interview was completely not true. Regardless of how many times I've gone through media training with him, he just doesn't get it. What do? I want to avoid hurting his ego, but need to figure out a solution before we lose more opportunities or get quoted saying something ridiculous.
Oh boy. Once again, probably not that uncommon. Listen, I've so many times where, you can put a founder, you're talking to a CEO or a founder of a company. They can, for me, they can talk about science until they're blue in the face, but you put them in front of a camera or you put them on the phone with a reporter, and it's like they completely clam up and just start filling the air with anything that kind of comes to mind. Difficult scenario, difficult situation, but not impossible to kind of navigate. Number one, he said that he was, doing the media training. I've had success in situations like this where we've pulled in external media training help, and there are a number of firms that have just really top-notch media training folks, and so you're almost like you're almost removing yourself from the equation by having a third party say to the CEO, "Yeah, you shouldn't be doing this," or at least doing their best to provide as much guidance and training as they possibly can, and let them kind of be the I hate to say it, but the bearer of bad news that, wow, maybe there should be a dedicated spokesperson inside the company that is just better at messaging. It's some people have great talents in some areas and they have faults in others. And a great CEO doesn't automatically mean they're going to be great in front of a camera or great talking to a reporter in person or on the phone. So if you have an external validator to essentially say, yeah, this is probably not a good idea, then you don't worry about the ego issue so much, at least directly impacting your livelihood as the internal person running communications. It's kind of a scapegoat way of doing it. But again, third-party validation is in this case might be a good thing. What do you think?
Yes, I always like when you bring in a neutral, quote unquote, third party, because then that opinion is not blemished in any way of some other preconceived notions or conversation, whatever. However, or I would say in addition to your recommendation here on these third party folks, who else do you have on the bench at this company? I mean, you're not going to have another CEO. Maybe there's a co-founder. Maybe there's a CTO. Is there anyone else in the C-suite? Is there anyone else who's the fancy PhD person? We don't know if this is a B2B company or something. We don't know what exactly is going on here. But a lot of times, and we've seen this before, the CEO, to your point, is just not, they're just not the stellar spokesperson. They're exceptional when it comes to the intellectual capacity and understanding what their industry is and all that stuff. And they can nerd out about that for 8 hours. But then also on the other side of that, you ask them a question, it's a 22-minute answer. Not good either. So Who else on this team? I'm sure there will be some other folks that you can diversify to and ask to bring on board. And then the next part of that is to delineate and make sure it's clear who's going to handle what. So we have, for example, ABC Fund, and we've worked with several in the past, and they have various partners. All the partners have their own areas of expertise. Great. And they're all chomping at the bit for the media attention. Wonderful. But what we've been able to do is say, okay, this person has these topics. That person has those topics. We will prepare you for each interview. And in other words, everyone has their own lane, and it's very clear. So if you have other people to pull from the bench here, you can have lane delineation. What you could make is, it doesn't solve your problem overall because you can't probably do nothing with the CEO, but at least you can give maybe a safer lane that can work while you work and bringing up the other folks from the bench and get out other pieces. That would be my suggestion. We've seen this before.
And with smaller companies, I think with smaller companies, sometimes there's a philosophical question that first needs to be answered. I've come in, I've had experience where a CEO wants to be the only one that's quoted. And that's part ego, part kind of driving leadership. And I've never really personally, I've always tried to push back on that because I don't necessarily understand it. Because if you do have a deep bench of executives and really smart people who can talk about whatever is the topic, you want to make sure that they're out there. I mean, obviously on a unified message, but also being quoted and again showcasing that deep bench of talent that you have. So if you can get past that part, then it opens up the door for not having to silo this, singularly using the CEO as kind of your core spokesperson. But it's sometimes a heavy mountain to climb or a heavy hill to get over.
It really is. And then you got to wonder, how do these people raise money? How do they even hire people? It's really amazing. Nothing surprises me, Rob. Nothing surprises me.
Again, it's this value of, broadly speaking, I think in terms of all of these questions that we've talked about, in terms of the value of PR, it's not only just kind of sales that you're supporting, or it's not just the company culture that you're supporting. We use PR as a lot for a recruiting tool because you want to attract the best and the brightest, and you want you want the best people to know about your company and to want to work there. And so that's where PR can be incredibly valuable. And then, in an internal, communications from a morale standpoint, particularly in this time that we're living in now, PR can be an incredible tool to demonstrate that the company is intact and that you're moving forward and that you're adapting to the current world that we're living in. So, I'm speaking to the choir, obviously, but in terms of the overall kind of value of PR, it's more than just, we got that article in that publication.
Oh, yes. I feel for this person. I really do feel for this person. Also, she is saying, I run PR for my company. In other words, this is not your client. You're just
yeah, I'm in house. And if I piss off the CEO, then I might not be here.
But then this is a philosophical question. We talked about this on another episode we just did about, is this a good time to maybe change your job or agencies or whatever to work with companies you really admire? I would ask, philosophical question for this person is just, why are you there? Because it's probably not the CEO who's gunning you up, but maybe it's the mission, maybe it's that. So maybe you can kind of go inside yourself and go what else can I bring to the table here that doesn't have to come straight from the CEO's mouth verbally? And then the other thing to this, the other side of this, which we've come across a number of times is, okay, live interviews, absolutely not. Phone interviews, Zoom video thing, nope, not going to do. Written, things that can be written and quoted and you get to review, fair game. Okay, that can keep things a lot more controlled. I'd suggest that. Now that does it, but now that eliminates, of course, a vast amount of the media you can get because interviews are part of the gig, but at least that is a controlled way to otherwise still get the CEO quoted and included, but controlled.
I have the most respect for the CEOs who can clearly see what they're good at and what they're not good at. I have a very good friend of mine who's a CEO of a startup company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and above his desk in his office, there's a framed piece of art that says, "Focus on what you're good at." I'm paraphrasing. Don't focus on the things you suck at. Now, the more appropriate way, the more appropriate grammatical way of saying that is, play to your strengths. But actually, don't do the things you suck at. It's just a little bit more poignant. So
also, it does not bring joy. Who likes to do things you're not good at? I mean, I don't. So
yeah. So if you're a CEO and you're not good at doing media interviews, own it. You'll get more respect from your team if you say, "Listen, I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at."
Totally. Oh my gosh. Well, good luck to all the writers who wrote in this week. Appreciate it, you guys. Rob, thanks so much for being on. This was great.
Oh, this is so much fun. Thanks again, Pam. Really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Dear Banff, the advice podcast for PR and marketing pros like you. Our show is created by BAM, a PR and marketing agency headquartered in San Diego and New York City. The music you're enjoying today was composed by Tiffany Dizon, produced by Daniel Kessner, and played by San Diego Symphony's Art of Alon. Thank you to our podcast production team at Citizen Recording. If you have a tough PR and marketing question you'd like us to answer, please write to us at bamtheagency.com/Dear Banff. Don't forget the F. We'll be back next Monday with another episode of Dear Banff. Until then,